Hi, again, this is Elliot Tracy. I did a webinar with this group a little over a month or so ago, and at that time what we were talking about is what are all of these new things? And so what is the CARES Act? What is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act? And really, how do we even interpret something that was so new and that it was changing almost every single day, a lot of the information? Now what we're getting, really where all of our questions are coming from is around this Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness. And how does it work? And I will be honest, here on May 12th at about 10 a.m. when we're recording this webinar, there's still a lot of questions that we haven't answered, and there still are things that we do not have answered. But I think we have the general sense of what this is going to look like. And all of the banks that I'm talking to that are doing these loans, all of them are saying the same thing. The general sense is that the SBA will try to use common sense when dealing with these rules, because everybody will have to interpret those. And if we're not using common sense, if we make this too complicated, both the bank and those who are receiving these funds are going to really struggle to utilize them appropriately. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to spend 15, 20 minutes at the most, just walking through what a sample calculation might look like. And these are numbers that I'm seeing from, I'm going to use some round numbers, so none of these are actual items, but it's what the general I'm seeing in an office that has 7 employees. Their loan amount is generally around $100,000 or in that range. Again, a lot of practices are going to have different amounts, different employee amounts, but this is probably for a small office with about 7 full-time equivalents based on the calculations. So this schedule, we have a couple of things here. We have 3 different tabs, and just a reminder with the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loan amount was 2.5 times the average monthly payroll. And what it did was it limited any person that was making over $100,000 to $100,000. In our case, I'm using $100,000 as the PPP loan amount, and that needed to be used in 8 weeks, and that is the covered period. Now, what we don't know, and here on May 12th, you'll see these highlighted yellow cells, that's where you enter information. The remaining cells are all calculating it. It's all based on calculations, and it's coming from these different tabs that we have here. But first off, if you receive PPP funds today, which in our case, that's May 12th, your period will end 8-week period 7/7/2020. This is a problem. Initially, this is a problem because that date is supposed to be June 30th. So all of the language within the CARES Act was that the money needed to be spent before June 30th in your covered week or your covered period of 8 weeks. So right away, we know even there are still loans out there that are being funded, and I know I saw somebody who just got their money yesterday. This is going to have to be addressed. This will be one of the first things the SBA will address is when is this person's 8-week, in this case, when does it really begin? Okay, that's one very, very important component. Now, when we talk about the use of funds, there's really 2 things that can be spent on. It's broken down into 2 categories. You have this payroll cost, and then you have other. And the other is the rent, the utilities, and utilities are electric, natural gas, water, telephone, internet, anything that's listed as a utility. And in this case, all of these things needed to be in place before February 15th, 2020. If it was not, it is going to be limited. So when we say in place, is you had an actual lease agreement, and there were utilities that you were already paying for, because otherwise they wouldn't be eligible. So what they're trying to do is not have you add additional items now that you've gotten everything up and you've gotten this money. For payroll cost, what we're looking at there is everything from wages, PTO, tips, cash equivalent, compensation. It needs to be included on a W-2. Now, the gross payroll does include guaranteed payments made to partners. So if you're a partnership, which most practices are not, but if you are a partnership, then you will not lose out just because it's not on a W-2. So that's our current understanding of that. The other items included in payroll costs are health insurance, Retirement plan contributions. This is for contributions made in 2020, but it cannot be, our understanding currently is for stuff that happened before. So your 2019 safe harbor or profit sharing are not eligible. Our understanding is that this is the 3% portion. As long as you generally pay that 3% portion throughout the year, then you should be able to include the retirement plan contributions as part of that. Another item, state unemployment, so SUTA, and then other state and local taxes. This is generally your workers' benefit fund, or if there's any taxes that are levied on the employer that are state and local specific, those will be included. Now, talking about this covered period, so you see here what we have is this schedule going by week. And what we're trying to do here is organize the information, because you will have to provide something back to the bank, and it is going to be the burden of you, the borrower, to prove to the bank that it is all forgiven. So if you have a schedule, that's something you can put together to organize it into column, or organize it in such a way that they can see it. So what my recommendation would be is you have an Excel template, and in the case of payroll, you're going to then have your payroll schedule that you're going to be using to fill in these numbers. You'll be able to reference directly from the schedule to an Excel template where your PPP funds are being used. So what I'm going to do today is walk through a sample calculation of what it might look like in many offices. So here we're going to change the date so that it doesn't end after June 30th. We're going to say that they received their funds on May 1st of 2020. So that puts them at June 26th. Now, an important note before I move on is, depending upon when your payroll fell, you may or may not have a more difficult calculation. And I'll give the example. If you're paying 2 times per month, and let's say it runs from the 1st through the 15th, and then the 16th through whatever the end of the month is. So February obviously is a shorter month. March is obviously a longer month. So if you have a schedule like that where you run half the month and then half the month, and it pays 5 days after that, right? So if you're following there, we have a PPP that started on May 1st. In my example, let's say the employer pays on May 5th, so 5 days within the month. But because the funds were received on May 1st, that payroll on May 5th is not, at the current moment, unless they've changed some rules, is not attributed to PPP. The reason there is because everything that happened was incurred before the day the funds were received. Now, the very next payroll, which in our case, in my example, would be on May 20th, because it's 5 days following the 15th, which is the last day of the pay period, you'll be able to take all of that. Now, when you get to the end here, you'll notice we are in the month of June. June has 30 days. We are 4 days short. So our understanding of this is you will only be able to include the 16th of June through the 26th of June in the payroll calculation. Now, what we don't know yet is, will you be required to run a special payroll on the last day to show that it was paid? So incurred and paid is the language that the SBA has been using. The incurred meaning it's a liability. So in my example a moment ago, that payroll was from April 30th, so it's not a liability as of the day you received the funds. The payroll that ends on the 20th, or when the funds, your 8-week period ends on the 26th, there is a liability of payroll within there. So are they going to require it to be incurred and paid before, in this case, the 26th? We just don't know yet, and we will have to see how that's going to work out. But we hope on May 14th or May 15th, the SBA is supposed to come out with some final guidance that is supposed to clarify hopefully all of our questions in regard to the PPP loan forgiveness amount. And so that's what this schedule is trying to do. So where we have had discussions, and like I said, so this is where the week is beginning. So the week begins on May, and this is a Monday. So all of these days up here, the way I've done this is it's on a Monday. So since we received money on May 1st, we'll be following in this week. So it's the week of May 1st, which was a Friday in this case. So we don't have any payroll. We're not doing any health insurance, but let's say your health premiums actually are due on the 1st of each month. You receive your funds, you make your health insurance payment, and let's say we do it on May 1st. So you can add it here. We'll just assume it's 5,000 is the monthly insurance premiums. That includes everybody, all staff, owner. It is the premiums that are paid by the employer. You might then add a note and say, health paid on 5/1. And then see invoice or whatever it is that you do. So now that note is there and it's a reminder. We're not doing any retirement in this case. We're going to exclude that. There's no state unemployment since we didn't have any payroll, and there's no state and local taxes because we didn't have any payroll. Let's assume rent and utility for the month of May is also paid. And let's just assume you pay that on May 1st or May 2nd, whenever you do. If your rent is 5,000 and your utilities, we'll just consider all three of these an average of about, we'll go $500 per month. So this is where this calculation kind of plays in. You'll see right now with the way this looks, you have the loan amounts, the amount's been used, what is remaining funds to be used, the payroll cost, which here's where we say this payroll cost has to be a minimum of 75%, and the rent and utilities have to be it cannot be more than 25%. That's to receive full forgiveness. So if you're, it is currently up in the air. We are not sure what's going to happen. What our hope is, using that common sense rule, and basically everything we've seen so far is that it's just going to be a pro rata reduction of your forgiveness amount. So I'll run through a couple of scenarios. We'll go to the other side. We'll create full loan forgiveness, and then we'll create somewhere in between. So the rent, we're going to pay that again on June, and 500 is our rent and utility amount again, or excuse me, our utilities. You'll see here, we're using 11,000. We could have used up to 25,000. We don't currently know, and our feeling is that they won't let us do this, but we assume they will not let us prepay the month of July or go back and pay for a month that where, maybe you skipped, maybe your employer said you can catch it up by the end of the year. That again comes back to that whole incurred and paid rule. So the month of April, if it's before, we're just not sure how that's going to be handled yet. But we do, hopefully, maybe they will allow that because they'll consider it paid. And so if that's the case, you would add another 5,000 in here for a month that was maybe skipped. But we're going to go through this calculation for now. So right now we have what's filled in. You'll notice we're coming up a little bit short, which that's okay. We can use payroll to kind of catch that up. If you're getting $100,000, your monthly average, and just to do the math there, so $100,000, you divide that by 2.5, that means your monthly average was about $40,000 in payroll, roughly. So 2.5 times monthly average payroll gives us the PPP loan amount. So if that's the case, we're going and we say that you have 40,000 in gross payroll that we're paying the week of May 4th. So we're not doing any other gross payroll. At the moment, we'll see how things work out towards the end. Health insurance has already been paid. We're not doing retirement. Let's just assume, generally these state unemployment and state and local taxes are pretty low. So let's just assume there's $100 for those because they're usually a pretty small percentage. Again, in our example, I'm saying they get paid the 5th and the 20th. So here's the other week. Oh, and I'm sorry, this one's not eligible, if you recall that discussion, because it was related to April. So I got ahead of myself there. So here's your 40,000. And like we said, we'll do $100 here. The next one that you'll have is the week of June 1st in this case, because we're paying on the 5th. So again, there's 40,000, 100. You see right now we've gone over our 75% base year, but that's okay. We can go over this number. If there's anything you want to go over on, it's on the payroll cost. But what you'll notice is that we're short about $3,800 based on this very simple calculation. You'll see what happens is when we do that, you're at an 85%, 11% for non, that's okay. Tentative amount, the maximum that could have been spent on the 25% 38%, which is this other was 24,000. We're well below that. So there's no non-payroll, portion that's going to be lost in this calculation. Like we said, we have 7 people. So if we look at this and say, okay, during this 8-week period, you're able to get all 7 people back to work. That 7 people, or those 7 people, are compared to what did we have as an average during February 15th and June 30th of 19, or what was the average for January through February 29th of 2020. All of these things are to help them say, okay, what's the reasonable number? Maybe your office started to downsize and you went from 7 to 5 as of the first part of the year, and that's what was more normal. We can make adjustments to that in here, but we're going to assume 7 and 7 is the number right now. So you'll notice we've met all of it. There's no reduction, 0 reduction. As a result, there's no forgiveness. And that $3,800, what we were not able to spend, is what is lost and is paid back. It's paid back over 2 years at 1%. The first 6 months are deferred. So really you have 2.5 years to pay this money back. It's very inexpensive. Now, one thing we've talked about is this other gross payroll. We've been talking with a lot of groups, and they're offering, because there's so many people who are on unemployment and they're receiving, in some cases more than they are working full time. What we're telling them in those cases is if their normal payroll is not going over 100,000, then you can provide them with an incentive or hazard pay or some type of bonus. It's not increasing their hourly rate. We're just giving them a bonus right now during this crazy time so that they can, feel more comfortable about going back, or it's going to incentivize them to come off unemployment. So in this case, we're going to give them, let's just say in the example, $4,000 split between staff. So you have this additional bonus. You're just going to do it equally for everybody. We're going to do 4,000 in total on the front end right there. Now look, we've spent all of our funds. More than 75% has been spent on payroll, and we have full forgiveness as a result. So that is one way to kind of work around this loan forgiveness, is looking at different incentives and bonuses. Now, if you can't get everybody back to work and you end up with 6, our understanding right now is there is going to be a reduction for that. But there also is, if it's not more than 15%, there may not be full reduction. We're going to see how this portion plays into it. But right now, this is our understanding, is it does a proration, and it says your portion of forgiveness is the difference between this number, which is your loan forgiveness, minus this amount that we've lost, and that's what needs to be paid back. There's also a discussion with the SBA, and we're hoping that this answer comes up, or this also comes up soon, is let's say you are not able to get everybody back to work at all. You made all the efforts, you can't get them back. The SBA is supposed to have some safe harbor, and what's going to happen there is, where our understanding is, if you can only get 5 people back, you see you're losing a portion of this, but they're going to change it and say, okay, your denominator now is only 5. So you're going to be able to get back to forgiveness, even though you tried as hard as you could. So they're treating it as if it's a kind of a safe harbor. But again, that's still kind of up in the air. We're still hoping for some answers on that. Final thing I want to show you just with this calculation is, how is this going to work if, let's say you have really high rent. So in our example, and you have really high utilities. So let's say your monthly rent is $15,000. Maybe you have a large space and your utilities are, we'll go with $1,500 a month. Okay, so now we've way overspent on these. And the example here is, look, we're at the 33% of the total was used. And so we're going to lose a portion of the forgiveness because you have this amount that is over. So if there's going to be a case where if you spend more than the 25%, even though, well, I guess ours isn't a great example because we use more than the 75% on payroll. But if I lower this down and let's say we couldn't get everybody back to work, so we only spent 25 and 25 and we came up a little short. This is where not all the funds are being used. You're going to have a forgiveness amount that's going to be lost. And a lot of it is because you're over the rent portion. So hopefully we get some more guidance soon on how to run through this calculation, but I would encourage you to have something that is tracking your expenses, and so that you can look at and determine, how do we handle the portion between payroll and your other PPP funds like rent and utilities, and how to calculate and get as close to forgiveness as possible with getting the amount of people that we have back. And so again, hopefully by May 14th or May 15th, we'll have enough time to, by May 14th or May 15th, we'll have enough information so that before your 8-week period's up, you will have enough time to determine how to use all these funds.